was. And from that point, I've been working full time reducing storm overflows. So this is kind of a bit of an overview of my experience and exactly how to do it, because it's a fairly new science, and it's not something that water companies or anyone else, for that matter, has been targeted with before. But before we go straight into it, I think there's almost a disclaimer and a brief that I need to give people for such a controversial subject. So it's almost a bit of a kind of fact check and myth busting thing at the start that I really need to go through. So CSOs actually protect something. So by something, really, it stops untreated sewage coming up through people's living rooms, filling up their houses, or it protects downstream treatment works. So treatment works do not have a finite capacity. And if too much water goes through them, they don't effectively treat the sewage. But on my first point, if we just simply blocked up these combined sewer overflows, people would flood so frequently that their homes just wouldn't be habitable. So the idea of us just blocking them up is not there. But I would also add that they're regulated and they're automated. So the idea that there's a couple of workers on site go, we're done for the day, we'll just dump the rest of it, we can't be bothered to treat it, that is a fabrication, and it's not true. So they're regulated, they're automated, and they operate to protect customers from flooding. But my next point is an important one of, if water companies only had to treat foul flow, CSOs would not be required. A lot of what we hear about it being inadequate infrastructure, I don't always accept that view. I would say it's what we're asking that infrastructure to do. When all the apparatus was built, they were designed to deal with dry weather flow, so water from toilets, sinks, dishwashers, foul flow, times 3. Now we've plunged so much into the system, so much stormwater, that the sites normally get 10, 15 times dry weather flow come through. It's just the root cause of CSO activation is urban creep and too much flow coming in when it rains. So if we're going to actually go after this, most of the work is going to have to take place on stuff that does not belong to water companies. Things like roads, roofs, car parks, driveways, conservatories. That is the root cause. I mean, we are paving over the UK at a rate of 1% every single year. And it's a subject of connectivity of where that water goes. If it's getting into our system, it's causing storm overflows. The penultimate point of the impact of CSOs is actually very poorly understood. And this kind of part may come across like I'm advocating for the use of CSOs. I'm not. I hate them. That's why I do what I do. However, we've got to be realistic about the actual impact of what they do. So we've heard from Joe in previous presentations about the impact of highway runoff. And CSOs, by their very nature, are intermittent. They go off depending on the CSO, the good ones under 10 times a year, the bad ones 50 times a year. That is not continuous. Things like agricultural runoff, road runoff, or treated effluent from sewage works, we need to look at the health of our rivers and understand the impact of that, which I'll go into a little bit later. And then the final point about the way that the whole situation has blown up has made it very, very difficult for water companies to recruit staff, because there's almost been a perfect pantomime villain here of the water companies. And if you do what I do, it's difficult to recruit good people because people perceive us as the bad guys who are going around indiscriminately pumping raw sewage into the environment. And we have to expand to achieve this particular work stream, and getting really good staff to do that is really, really hard. And there needs to be a bit of a change in rhetoric if we're going to improve this. So with that out of the way, I'll start talking about how we do actually reduce storm overflows. So when the whole situation detonated in 2021, I'd attribute that to a number of things, some high-profile court cases, an increase in transparency around how storm overflows are reported, and also people kind of reconnecting with the outdoors after lockdown. We got through that, and Southern Water's response was to create the Cleaner Rivers and Seas Task Force, which I was kind of in on the ground floor on. Macquarie, the owners, gave us £7 million to say, right, go out and find ways to reduce storm overflows. And then that was finally recognised by Ofwat in 2023. And we were targeted with learning for the rest of the industry. So the bulk of this presentation will be presenting those learnings about how we found new ways to reduce storm overflows. And where we are now in the next investment cycle in 2025, we've now got 1.5 billion to spend on storm overflow reduction. So I'm going to have to go through some pretty technical stuff. So Louise, just give me a nudge if this is too much detail. CSOs are effectively elaborate rain gauges. So when it rains, they activate. So separating out true performance is very, very difficult. But the way we do this is use a statistical model. So the brown line that you can see, the solid brown line, is the level in the combined sewer overflow. And it's got two dotted tram lines next to it. That's the AI model that predicts what the level in the sewer will be. So you can see the blue is when we have a little bit of rainfall, and the brown line goes up and down, and that's because the sewer level is responding to the rainfall. Now, the tram lines go a bit bananas either side of it because the AI model that tracks that sees the rainfall and predicts where the sewer will be during that particular rainfall event. So lo and behold, we can predict what rainfall event will cause that particular CSO to activate. And if you see on the right-hand side, the rainfall is intense enough and goes on for long enough to cause that CSO to activate, of which the AI model has predicted. So if we see it on a chart like that, it stands to reason that we can put it in a table. So for all these CSOs that you can see on this table, what this shows is the percentage chance that CSO is going to activate to that rainfall event. So if we take the first one at the top, for instance, Newport CSO, if we have a 5 millimeter rainfall event, it has a 20.
Kate,
oh, hello.
sorry to interrupt. There's a little graphic on your screen which says App Zoom is sharing your screen.
Yes.
Can you see that? Can you hide that?
Gone.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure. So here's a list of CSOs, and what this table shows is the likelihood that they will activate at a given rainfall event. So Newport at the top has a 20% chance of a spill at 5 millimeters of rainfall and a 67% chance of a spill at 10 millimeters of rainfall. So we know how sensitive all of our combined sewer overflows are to set rainfall events. And if we go right to the bottom, it's pretty horrific how some of these things activate so frequently. Fairley Road at Newport has a 100% chance of a spill at a 5 millimeter rainfall event. So, that's completely unacceptable, but it stands to reason we shouldn't have to take that much rainwater out to get that CSO behaving a lot better. What you see here is kind of heat maps from the hydraulic model to say, all right, you've got a CSO that's quite sensitive to rainfall. Where is that rainfall coming from? So the hydraulic model puts out these heat maps to say, this is where it thinks the water is coming from. So in this sensitive CSO, if you're going to go and look for areas to remove stormwater, these are the areas which you would do it. So the car parks, the roads, the roofs, the urban areas that have their roofs connected into the foul sewer that is causing the CSOs to activate, which is very, very useful. And I'll kind of give a case study of this a little bit later. And then there's no shortcut for the next bit, is you've actually got to prove the hydraulic model, i.e., is it accurate? And the only real way you can do that with any degree of confidence is stick a camera up there, which the gentleman in the top right is doing, or tip dye down the sewers. And what we've been able to do in the big map that you see is build up a picture of all the urban areas where we've been working to say what's connected to the foul sewer and what isn't. So the green areas are the roads, and we're pleased to say in this area, which is in Gosport, all of the roads are not connected, but for each house that we find connected, we've coloured in red. So that tells us in this particular area, the CSO is not activating because the roads are connected. It's activating because the roofs are connected. And if we want to go and fix CSOs there, we're going to have to find another home for all the water that runs off the roofs. So we go into, once we've kind of characterized the catchment and we know it's coming from, we've got almost like a 5-step process that we follow in each area to try and fix storm overflows. So although I said previously that each treatment system has a finite capacity, I don't think I'd have any challenges to say that water companies could do more with the apparatus that they've got. And the top slide that you can see is looking down into a CSO. And what we've done is we've put a valve on the outlet of that CSO. The downstream properties do flood, and so it does protect them, but it's too conservative at the moment. So that valve will go up and down when the downstream sensor tells it we need to be worried about flooding. So that in essence, is making us use our system at its absolute capacity rather than the capacity it was at before. That particular example has saved about 70 spills per year. So we're using our entire capacity. Yes, we are increasing the flood risk slightly, but it's been mitigated by that valve that when the properties downstream are at risk of flooding, it will wind down and we will spill and they will be safe. The one in the bottom right, the two pumping stations, we've got a pumping station that pumps 90 litres a second, and it pumps flow to a pumping station that pumps 60 litres a second. Now, it doesn't take a mathematician to say that there's a shortfall of 30 litres a second there. And the pumping station downstream that does 60 spills on quite a regular basis. So we've worked with the Environment Agency to kind of change the permitting regime for those pumping stations so that the first pumping station holds back its flow and protects the downstream pumping station. Now, in the bottom left, you can see 3 circular tanks, which are the storm tanks at one of our pumping stations. And on the left, you can see kind of a more rectangular one that's kind of green. That's about 10,000 meters cubed of additional storage that we've unlocked on a site, which I'll kind of show you how that worked in a minute. But generally, when we look about optimizing our infrastructure, can we pump more? Can we treat more? Can we store more? Or can we balance the flow? So the one on the bottom left is an example of where we've had 10,000 meters cubed of storage, which is an absolutely colossal amount. And you'd think, yeah, that's going to make the problem go away. It doesn't make the problem go away for most settings. And this is what the level in that tank looks like over the course of a few months. So in essence, we increase the storage by that much, but it fills up in about 12 hours during a storm. There's about 2,000 litres a second that come into that site when it rains. Yes, it does save the occasional spill, but for the best part, because it takes about 4 days to return that flow back to treatment, if we have a subsequent rainstorm in that period, it spills and it spills. So when storm tanks fill up, they need to return. They need to return that flow back to treatment. It can't do that quick enough to stop the spills. So if we're looking at it in terms of volume, the volume is just too great in this instance for the storage to be effective. So if you're going to take anything away from this, I would say that water companies aren't going to build their way out of this particular problem. There isn't really going to be tanks that are going to be big enough. The focus really has got to be on, once we've optimized our sites, to take the flow out. So the rest of the presentation is really going to be about how we take the flow out. The next thing we look for is large storm connections. So this is where developers have come along. They've built a new development and they've done the right thing. They've separated out the stormwater from the foul and they connect it into the combined system because they've got nowhere else to put it. So if you look at the kind of map on the right-hand side, there's a blue line, which is the stormwater system. There's a brown line, which is the foul, and then they converge. And the photograph that you can see is the chamber in which it happens. So there are lots of these all over the country where someone has just put a large diameter stormwater sewer into the foul sewer. And we do our due diligence to make sure it's got no nasties in it, but then we find another home for that because it's not the right place to put it in the foul sewer. So pretty quick and easy method to take out what we call non-foul flow out of the system. Then, as you saw from the diagram, we know which houses are connected, and we almost have a hierarchy approach to how we deal with domestic properties. So the best thing to do is just disconnect them. And the picture that you can see where there's a bit of a scar on the footpath outside and the block paving, we've just disconnected that property. There's a stormwater sewer that their roof drainage can go into. Each house contributes about 50, 60 tons of water into our system every single year. That one is now no longer doing that. We've gone as far as paying people as well, about £70 per square metre to take up their impermeable area and replace it with something permeable, which you can see on the bottom. And the customer who previously had these awful kind of horrible concrete blocks has now got a nice shingle area. They've built themselves a planter and they've diverted their downpipe onto the planter. That's exactly the kind of behavior that we would like to see from our customers in managing their flow. And then the final kind of level in the hierarchy, if we can't control water any other way, we try and attenuate it through the mass rollout of slow drain water butts. Now, these are water butts that aren't like your average water butt that just fill up and stay full. They have a slow drain feature so that after the rainstorm, they slowly drain their flow and there's always a capacity ready to capture the next rainfall event. And from the heat maps that we have, we're particularly interested in non-household properties. So things like warehouses, schools, community centres, churches, because they have much bigger roofs, which make disconnection really economical for us. But also some of these big areas can absolutely contribute huge amounts of flow into the public foul sewer. So the example of there is an old ambulance depot, which we found to be connected, which was 2,500 meters squared. Absolutely ridiculous amounts of flow came in there when it rained. And again, we go through a similar hierarchy. Can we separate it out? Because that's the priority, just to get it out of our system clean cut. But if we can't, we go down the route of putting in these attractive planters that you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, especially when we're working with things like churches or community centres where the aesthetics are important. These planters kind of slow down the flow, attenuate it. And if you do it en masse like we are doing, then they can have a massive impact. Then going on to kind of the final areas, is we move into the public realm, where the biggest contributor is the public highway into water, into our system. And it's important for us to work with local authorities to put in sustainable drainage. So by sustainable drainage, I mean things like rain gardens, tree pits, swales, detention basins, etc. And retrofit them into urban areas. So some of these are theory, some of these are practice. So the top two pictures are schemes that we're hoping to deliver with the Isle of Wight Council. So the top left one being Gurnard, where we're looking to take about 3.5 hectares out. And then in the town centre in Newport and Ryde as well, we have similar. And then there's a couple at the bottom that we have done. We've put in some kind of swales in school playgrounds as well, where the runoff from the school goes into these lovely wildflower basins, and the kids have got areas that they can play. Then the bottom two are in Kent, where we're working with Kent County Council in Gloucester Road, just to put in some rain gardens. And you know, my personal view of all this is they can transform urban areas. They can offer insect pollination. They can offer urban cooling, and generally they look a lot nicer than the kind of concrete jungle areas that they replace. That's subjective, but you know what also comes with this is people's affinity for motor vehicles and parking, etc. And this is extremely disruptive for people. However, the presentation that we heard from Joe, we heard lots of nasty things that are in highway runoff, and this solves that particular problem. Because what we've incentivized water companies to do now is separate out stormwater at all costs, not think about where it goes or what it is. We don't want to do that. If we're going to put water in the environment, it needs to be rainwater, not rainwater mixed with road salt or hydrocarbons or whatever. So just to bring all that together in a case study, I'll bring you to Fareham, and there's a CSO in the high street, and it releases water into the River Wallington that goes into Portsmouth Harbour. It's a designated shellfish water, Ramsar, SPA, Triple SI, all of those things. And in 2023, it spilt 92 times, which you know should be disgusting and revulsive to most people, myself included. So we went through the process that I just talked through. So that particular area that you can see on the left-hand side, the dark area, that's where the hydraulic model is suggesting all the flow is coming from for High Street Fareham. So we went out and tested it, and we dye tested it, and we found that similarly to the one I showed you in Gosport, all of the red roofs there, they were all connected into the public foul sewer. And all the roads largely weren't. So this was really a connectivity problem of when the whole area was built, the road runoff went into one pipe and the roof runoff and the foul went in the other pipe. So really our objective was quite clear. We need to take loads of people's roofs out. So the one on the left is where we're doing a hard disconnection. The one in the middle is where we've actually dug a soakaway for the customer. So a very kind and understanding customer said, yeah, I don't mind having a soakaway in my garden. So we diverted their downpipe, not to the sewer, but to a soakaway, which we reinstated there to the customer's satisfaction. We've also found a big car park connected, which was Lycey's car park in Fareham. If anyone knows it, it's the main town centre car park. And that was 3,500 metres squared going straight into the CSO. And what we did at this particular car park is we'd love to have done something nice with Fareham Borough Council, but we didn't really have enough room. So rather than have an open swale, we had a kind of swale that was buried, a French drain, and then those little curb blocks there, they drain into that swale, which when it's overwhelmed, it rather than overflow into our sewer now, it overflows into kind of a dry ditch type scenario. So we've got 3,500 meters out, and also, I think it looked a bit more attractive, and it's all kind of grassed over now, and it looks quite nice. The large warehouse that I spoke about, that came out as well. And all in all, we took about 50 domestic properties out of the foul sewer in the area. And that had a transformational effect. So if you think back to the chart that I showed you earlier about the predicted levels in the sewer versus the actual levels in the sewer during rainfall, this is what it looks like. So when we got some rainfall events during the summer, I logged onto my computer and I was absolutely delighted to see that in spite of the rainfall, the sewer levels hadn't come up and they hadn't spilled. But the AI model that's tracking that has actually predicted those spills. So we'd save spills in essence. And because of the nature of separation, it hasn't deteriorated. And last week, before I did this presentation, I put this slide together, and just last week we saved about 4 spills, which was pretty good. So if you kind of plot those up together, the blue line is the predicted spill count for the year. So the blue line is predicted we should be about 22 spills. The red line is the actual spill count. So it has spilled, but we're down to 10. So we've kind of almost better than half the prediction of the AI model. And it's been through a pretty big 15 millimeter rainfall event, which is encouraging. So what's next is really looking at this gap about how we separate out these properties in Gosport. So we've done 120 of them so far, but all in all, if you extrapolate the area out, there's 800. So this kind of underlines how disruptive storm overflow reduction can be. But it also allows us to almost put a cost to it. So for a domestic separation, we're looking at 150 to 250 pounds per square meter. Soakaways are a little bit cheaper, but not every customer wants them at £100 per square meter. The non-domestic properties, to take those out, about £50 per square meter. And if we want to put sustainable drainage in, it's the most expensive way of doing it, of £300 to £500 per square meter. But being positive about all of this, I'd say it can be done. So these are the combined sewer overflows I was working on for about 3 years. And I've kind of contrasted their spill count in 2023 to 2024. And all in all, there's a difference in over 500 spills in terms of what we've done. So that's the positive side of it. The kind of negative side of it is kind of where they actually need to be. So some of these ones have more than halved, which is really good, but the spill counts are still really, really high. So the second one from the top, Apley Park, we've doubled the flow, we've quadrupled the storage. Yes, it's gone from 141 spills to 57. 57 is still too high in many people's view, and there's an awful lot of work to go on to get us where we need to be. One of the questions that I get asked quite a lot is, okay, how can I help? I really want to help. And there are some people that if everyone kind of collectively did these things, would make a massive impact. So just look at your property and where the water goes from your property. Can you use permeable paving? Can you depave your driveway? Do you really need all of this? If people are having extensions, make sure your surface water is connected to the right pipe. Also make sure your foul water is connected to the right pipe as well, because when your foul water goes into a stormwater line, it doesn't get treated and it goes straight out. If you do live in an area where there's a combined system, can you collect rainwater? Can you slow it down? Can you divert it onto your garden? There's a lot of anger around this issue. Can this anger be directed into things like responding to consultations, looking at local planning registers to see when new developments are coming, whether the system can cope with it, engage with things like that? Pretty obvious, but only flush toilet paper and your own waste down the toilet. And also, water companies can't be the eyes and ears all the time. If you see something that's not right, report it and we'll respond with our highest priority. At this point, I probably want to bring it on to water quality. And my point about it's very difficult to separate out the overall harm from combined sewer overflows, because when they're operating, it's generally raining and there's other stuff going on as well. So highway runoff from fields, etc. Trying to separate out the impact of those from the impact of CSOs is very, very difficult. We conducted a bit of a bathing water experiment, and we gave a local charity on the Isle of Wight called Swim the Wight, and supported by the Wild Heart Animal Sanctuary, a fluidian device which measures E. coli by a proxy. And they sampled the water quality at Sandown and Yaverland every day for about 3 years. And this is kind of an excerpt of their data. So on the y-axis, the bar chart is the E. coli reading. And if there's a little black spot underneath it, there was a combined sewer overflow from Sandown on that day. It's very, very difficult to draw any kind of correlation between combined sewer overflow activations and high E. coli's. It's a loose one, I would say, but we have very high readings on days where there hasn't been storm overflows, and low readings on days where there has. So all this kind of builds out a bit of a muddled picture. I mean, where we really plan to go with this is send it to a statistician and say, draw some conclusions from this. But what water companies are going to have to do with reference to the Environment Act and the Section 82 is effectively upstream, downstream point of discharge monitoring on combined sewer overflows. And I think that's going to really help us build a bigger picture of what the overall impact is. My personal view is that there'll be some CSOs that have a profound local impact on their watercourses, and there'll be some of them that don't really. And I think the ability to target that is going to be really valuable going forward. So there's some other activities that my team and I do, as well as just storm overflow reduction. We're really working towards an area-based charging thing, because at the moment you could argue that domestic customers are funding non-domestic customers in the way that areas are drained. I feel like if you've got a big kind of Amazon-style distribution center warehouse, you should probably pay more for your wastewater bill than if you've got a domestic property, because the sheer volume of water that's going to come off that and the car park when it's rained is going to be astronomical. And also what that is going to do is it's going to encourage people with large surface areas to sustainably drain them, not just chuck it into our system. We've also worked with local authorities to improve our stormwater management policy. So if you're ever bored one night and need to sleep, look at Welsh Water versus Barratt Developments. And that was the one where Barratt Developments wanted to build quite a large development of about 800 homes, and Welsh Water said, no, you can't put that in, it's going to cause flooding. It went to court, and the court ruled in Barratt's favour. And from that point onwards, it could be said that water companies didn't really have a lot of control as to what gets put into their system. We're challenging that, and we're saying if the downstream combined sewer overflow spills more than 10 times per year, we're going to reject that particular application and work with the local authority to find other ways to do it. We're also putting a lot of weight behind Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act, which will make SuDS mandatory for all developments, not just large developments, and also give water companies the power to stop development or work with developers to make things better before the development is built, and then really work with local planning authorities to make sure that the new housing stock that is built drains sustainably and is water efficient. And together we kind of work on the existing housing stock, which should be the problem, not going forward. And then, we also do a fair bit of lobbying around things like wet wipes to make sure that they are banned, because there's a number of loopholes to the ban that was announced earlier. So what's next with all this? So we've got about 1,000 storm overflows in our region, and it does need to be said that 50% of them are already below 10 per year. We're just dealing with the 50% that aren't. And we've got our Cleaner Rivers and Seas app, which tells you when and where these things are going and for how long. But it's got a toggle on the left-hand side that tells you what our plan is for that particular CSO, where we're going to be investing, when we're going to be investing, and roughly what we're going to do. So the DEFRA and the Environment Agency has prioritized all of those 1,000 CSOs, and we're just working through a program to fix that. In terms of what the law says, the Environment Act says by 2035, water companies will improve all storm overflows discharging near every designated bathing water, 75% of storm overflows discharging into high priority areas. So we're currently working on this plan for 2035. And then by 2050, no storm overflows will be permitted to operate outside of unusually heavy rainfall. But then there's the other part of it as well, which is what I referenced about Section 82, which is water companies will only be permitted to discharge from a storm overflow where they can demonstrate there is no adverse ecological harm. So really the first step is to quantify that ecological harm of that particular overflow and challenge based on harm rather than where it discharges into at the moment, which is kind of what we've got, which is the best targeting that we could currently do. One of my final slides, I just need to emphasize how important partnership is. So the observant amongst you would have kind of gone through my slides, and apart from point one, which was optimizing our own apparatus, it was all on third parties. So roads, roofs, highways, conservatories, and driveways, that's where we were working. So fundamentally, we won't get where we need to be if we just dig holes, build tanks, and pass forward more flow. And I would also kind of add the other part of it as well, that a cubic meter of water weighs a ton. And one of the biggest costs for water companies is power. So pumping what is almost exclusively rainwater around in circles for treatment, there comes a point where the environmental harm of dealing with that isn't offset by the environmental harm of actually releasing it. So partnership and working with people who own, operate big impermeable areas is going to be absolutely key. And at the moment, because everyone seems to have joined this water company pylon, it's very, very difficult to encourage people that we're a force for good and we want to work with them to make the environment a better place. And that kind of rhetoric does need to change, in my view. So to kind of bring all this together, water companies by law are going to have to reduce combined sewer overflows by 10 spills per year, and that's what we've got to do. And we've got 1.5 billion to fix somewhere in the region of 200, 250 all over the South Coast over the next 5 years. But I would labour the point and say this isn't just a water company problem. We could make our tanks as big as we like and they're not going to work for the reason that I showed you. We are going to have to work on stuff that's not ours, and in some catchment that's all we will work on, because that's the water that's coming in that's causing the problem. A real big opportunity for all watercourses to benefit from this in terms of Section 82 and how we're going to better monitor the real time the water in our rivers. Not only will that allow us to build a better picture of overall river health, but it will allow us to quantify the impact of CSOs. And then my final point is that having dealt with this for a while and kind of ridden the wave of anger that came out of it, I am starting to see a little bit of fatigue in the issue in terms of people that are engaging with the subject. And the bills going up, you know, my job really is to make sure that every penny of that is going to be spent in the right places. And I have to be realistic about it. The people on this call have probably joined because they really, really care about it. There are some people that don't care as much and don't want to pay the additional money in their bill to make this particular issue go away. And in the next 5 years, is that still going to be the same? You know, are Ofwat's still going to want to continue their inexorable challenge of combined sewer overflow reduction? I hope so, but then you have to factor in other things like highway drainage, agricultural runoff, the other things that are challenges to water quality. Are they be giving equal credence into this? So that's a kind of a bit of a wrap up and everything I wanted to go through today. I believe we've got some questions from the group while I've been going on. Yeah, welcome any questions that anyone's got. I can see 9 already.
Yeah, thank you very much, Keith, and thank you for doing this for us today. It's really interesting to get your perspective, particularly how it sort of ties in with some of the things that Jo Bradley was talking about in her presentation, and how we deal with all that water and where it should go. So yeah, thank you very much. We have got some questions, so I will go through these in the order that they were posted. If anyone's got any other questions, then do put them in the Q&A. So the first one was from Roy Seabrook. I'll just read it out as it's written. Capacity is usually defined on dry weather capacity. For planning of development, should wet weather capacity be considered? Should regular storm discharges be a sign of lack of capacity when considering planning applications?
Thank you for the question, Roy. Great question. In terms of combined sewer overflows, capacity is defined in the permit. So what you'll typically see for a CSO is it will have a pass forward rate. So say if it's passing forward 50 litres a second, the discharge will be legal. If it's passing 55 litres a second, that will be a permitted discharge. So that is kind of almost the logjam of CSOs, if you like, because water companies are funded to meet the permits, not exceed them. So roughly, they're about 3 times dry weather flow, roughly. But then all of these permits were issued in the kind of 80s and no longer representative of the catchments they serve. You can have 10 times the population anymore. So in terms of planning and development, yeah, I would absolutely agree that storm overflow downstream should be considered as part of the planning application. Hence, our new stormwater management policy that says, look, if it's a foul system, we're not going to accept any stormwater. Really, really sorry. If it's a combined system, if the downstream CSO goes more than 10 times, we're not going to accept it purely because we'll have to take it out again anyway to meet our 10 spills per year target. So, yeah, 100% agree with that.
Okay, thank you. So there's a specific question. Andy Morgan asking if he can get the Bosom wastewater treatment works CSO profile. Is that something
Yep,
that you can
absolutely.
organise?
Yeah, if you want to share my details with Andy after this, I can send that over.
Yeah, I can do that. Making a note. Okay, Veronica, I want a copy of the slides. So yeah, well, if you can send me a copy of the slides, Keith, and then I can share it with everyone afterwards, if that's okay.
Sure.
So an anonymous person is asking, are homeowners able to contact you to find out if their properties are connected correctly?
I mean, I would say that that's I should have added that to one of the things that people can do to help. I mean, if you're fortunate or unfortunate enough to live in one of those heat mapped areas, then we will come to you and we will get there. If you live outside of that, I wouldn't say it's a particularly difficult activity on a Sunday afternoon if you're bored to get a little bit of dye, tip it down your downpipe and see where it goes. So we would do it if we do have a particular driver or reason to do it in your area, and we would let you know. Not sure we would go out looking for it if we can't, because like I say, I've got to make sure that the money we've got is best used to reduce storm overflows. And yeah, if it's your private property, nothing stopping you doing that yourself.
Okay, thank you, Keith. And if people are, maybe not in a position to carry out that test themselves, is there a service available that they can
Yeah, I
make
mean,
use of?
generally when you buy or sell a property, the drainage survey that you have done is part of the conveyancing process. And having a little drainage plan is certainly not a bad thing to have on your property. But I kind of come back to my point of the cumulative impact of all of this is increased CSO activation of lots of people thinking, it's a water company problem, when in actual fact, they've had a new conservatory built and that's going into the foul system. Their roof's going in. They've just had their driveway done as well, and that's running down and going into the foul system. We need to have some personal responsibility about this issue to protect against flooding and pollution. And I've worked in communities many years that suffer from flooding. The people at the top of the hill are horrified when they realize that all of their driveways, all of their conservatories are causing flooding for the people at the bottom. But they enter in this with the best will in the world, but they don't necessarily realize the impact of the runoff from their property of what it's having.
Okay, thank you. So Sam's asking, how are Southern Water managing groundwater infiltration from leaking and damaged pipes? How are leaks identified? How are they repaired, lined, or replaced? How many repairs have been made this year?
It's a great question from Sam. I mean, that is probably another 45-minute presentation within itself to do that particular subject justice. I've focused purely on storm response today in terms of CSO reduction, but there is another cause for CSOs, and that is groundwater infiltration getting in. So to go about it really, really quickly, how do we identify that? We identify it through the sewer level monitors, through temperature sensing, through the characteristics of it, and we've got a choice really. Do we treat it and let additional flow through our works? And there's the Lavant wetland that we've got, but that's in a bit of a permitting uncertainty with DEFRA and the Environment Agency, or we just seal our sewers. But then generally you get infiltration in chalky rural areas where our sewer network constitutes less than half of the overall network. So we kind of get into the realms of we need to work on the private as part of the pipe work to seal it, because private pipe work is generally in poorer condition than the public network. So yeah, I could come back and talk about groundwater infiltration, but really, how many repairs have been made this year? The sealing has the kind of nuance of we're repairing pipes that are fine and the groundwater pressure is so high that it's squeezing its way in. So I wouldn't say it's naturally structural problems with our network. It's just when you get kind of chalky low-lying areas like the Lavant Valley or the Hampshire chalky stream area, groundwater just pushes its way in because it's about 1 to 2 bar of water squeezing its way in, and we need to seal that out. So I can't really do that subject justice in a 5-minute response to a question, but it's an entirely different work stream, an entirely different problem that we're going to have to get our hands around.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I know a lot of that work is going on around my area. I'm living in Chichester, and a lot of work going on in the Lavant Valley and the Bosom catchment as well. Relining pipes. Okay, so is Southern Water able to police and or regulate new developments to make sure rainwater is connected correctly?
Absolutely not. So at the moment, water companies are not statutory consultees in the planning process, and they have absolutely no powers to reject planning applications. Again, going back to my lobbying slide, this is something that we disagree with and are really looking to change. I mean, in reality, that's kind of hyperbole. We work closely with planning authorities to scrutinise new developments and feedback. And I guess my point on this would be that the bigger developments that we tend to see get quite a lot of scrutiny. What's killing it is the cumulative impact of driveways, conservatories. So the bigger developments, generally the regulation is quite good, and the enforcement is quite good. For the driveways, the conservatories, just the little bits of urban creep, that to me is a bigger problem because it just goes under the radar. So, our response to that in some cases is almost fund local authority enforcement officers, but also work with local tradespeople to say, you do realize that your client should have planning permission for this particular driveway, because if you've got more than 5 meters squared of impermeable area, you need planning permission. Now that's something that's not really enforced. It's just kind of you get your driveway done and that's it. But again, going back to my point about people, I'm sure if they were aware that was causing flooding and pollution, they'd be mortified and they'd think differently about it. But most people don't. So it's more of an education issue.
Yes, yeah. And the issue of water companies being or not being statutory consultees on the planning process. I know that my MP, for example, has supported you becoming statutory consultee. So is that something that people could write to their MPs about to try and push that point forward?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly don't want to advocate looking over the fence and grasping your neighbours about have you got planning permission for that.
No.
However, it's more of an education issue in how we can work with people, because we've spent tens of thousands of pounds on getting people to pull up their driveways and put in something a little bit more sustainably draining, which is great. and our challenge to planning authorities is, look, no more. Let's deal with the existing housing stock and the existing problem. Let's not create more impermeable area to run into our system. So, for the best part, that's going really well. I'd just say on the little day-to-day smaller jobs, cumulatively, that's going to create more problem.
Okay. So Andy's asking, is 10 spills per year the government target by 2050?
It is. It
Yeah.
is. Personally, I can see that being changed once we've got all of the kind of water quality monitors in and around the CSOs and focus towards the ones that have the biggest impact.
Okay. So how much difference would behaviour around water consumption make a difference to wastewater treatment works capacity? Current average usage is around 140 litres per person. What would it need to be to make a meaningful impact?
Behavior around water consumption would make a massive impact to the supply side of water companies. It would make a negligible impact towards wastewater. So, I could just reel off statistics about this. So, what one house with their roof connected is worth 80 without. So, 100 litres per person per day over the course of a day is nothing. If you know the square meterage of your property, normally properties are about 60 square meters, and you know the rainfall, you can calculate the volume that's come off that roof during that rainfall event. So CSOs, especially in stormy catchments, it's all about the rainfall. It's all about the non-foul flow. The baseline flow makes very, very little difference. And we get into the treatment side of it as well. So wastewater treatment works. The bugs that do the treatment, they need the sewage. And if you just feed them rainwater, you're just watering it down, you get a poorer quality effluent. So, increasing the behavior around consumption is going to make a massive benefit to the water supply side of the business. To the wastewater, nothing at all, because when it rains, we get 1 part sewage for 10 part rainwater. It's just unbelievable.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, got lots of questions coming in. On Rivers and Seas Watch, why can you still only subscribe, i.e. you get automated notification about a given site to designated bathing areas? People do have other reasons for wanting to know how their local wastewater treatment works is doing, other than because they want to go for a swim.
I was unaware of that, Veronica. I shall pick that up with the Rivers and Seas Watch team.
Great, thank you. Andrew is asking, can you reiterate the legal requirements for reducing the number of discharges and by when?
There are 55 storm overflows that need to be fewer than 10 activations per year by 27. Then there's another 131 CSOs that need to be under 10 per year by 2030. So roughly about 250 CSOs are in that Ofwat's priority area that we are working on before 2030. Beyond 2030, it's difficult really to know what's going to happen because it's all kind of dependent on our funding cycles. So I can confidently say there's about 250 CSOs that need to be under 10 spills per year by 2030, if that makes sense. And then if you read the DEFRA Storm Overflow Reduction Plan, it gives you a little bit of a rationale about how they made those decisions on discharging into priority areas. Ultimately, with the view of the previous question of all under 10 spills per year by 2050.
Okay. So Veronica asking, why do so few wastewater treatment works have targets set in their permit for E. coli? Is it only the ones located near designated swimming areas or shellfish that have ever had E. coli targets? If so, is that likely to change in the future?
Water companies do not write the permits for wastewater treatment works. The permits come from the Environment Agency, and what the Environment Agency will do will look at things like the dilution factor, the tide, the sensitivity of the receiving water course, and they will give a water company a view of what that permit will say, and we will design, build, and operate that plant in accordance with the permit. Veronica raises the very good point of sometimes those permits aren't representative of A, the catchment they serve, and B, the watercourse that they discharge into. So, one could argue that this could be solved by better permitting, but they're quite complex legal documents and they take kind of years in the making. And an example of that would be the phosphorus permits that came out over the past 5 years. They've caused a massive increase in investment to tackle some of the phosphorus and nutrient problems that come out of water supply works, but they were driven by permitting. So if the Environment Agency said, right, I want UV on that particular outfall to kill all the E. coli, we'd have to do that if that said that in the permit. So my view would be that we just have to meet those permits. And if the permit doesn't say it, it's very difficult to fund that particular upgrade because it won't be in our business plan.
Okay. I should probably be asking the EA this, but if people are unhappy with the way the permits are set, I mean, how do we open up that conversation? Is that with the EA? Is that with the water companies?
Again, I go back to my slide about what you can do to help. And I don't think some of these permits were done in the 1980s, 1990s, and they do need changing. And a more agile permitting system is one of the things that we would really like, and work with the Environment Agency and local communities to beat this. And so sometimes these things need a push to get all the right people together to make the right decisions, and I'd say that this is one of them.
Right. Okay, I'll move on to other questions. So Steve is asking, local authorities don't seem to enforce the covering over of permeable areas. People are adding to the problem. So how are Southern Water working with local authorities to stop hard surfaces being created?
In a lot of cases, Steve, we're funding additional resource for local authorities to combat this particular problem, because if it's a combined area and it's running off into our system, we need to help local authorities with this. And so we meet with them regularly to discuss growth, to discuss planning, local area plans, and enforcement of this particular issue is a weakness. But then there's the carrot and the stick. And I said before that we work with tradespeople to encourage their clients to apply for planning permission so it can go through the correct process. Would anyone ever have the guts to go and start enforce this kind of thing with driveways? I don't know. I wouldn't say that's necessarily the right way to go about it, but increased understanding and visibility of it is definitely something that we need to do.
Okay, Veronica, maybe you've answered this already, but I will ask it. Is the 10 spills per year target for 2030 or 2035?
It really depends on which combined sewer overflow. So I know there's lots of apps where you can track them and track the whether your particular CSO is spilling and for how long. But there's a tab on the left-hand side of ours that kind of says where it is in terms of the investment cycle and when it's going to be fixed. So all the CSOs have got to get to 10 spills sometime. It's just a case of when. So 54 are lucky enough to be fixed before 27, 131 before 2030, and then it gets a bit uncertain beyond 2030 because it's got to go through an investment cycle. But the Rivers and Seas Watch does tell you when we're going to do it.
Great, thank you. Kate is asking, there's been a ground truthing project in the Bognor-Felpham area looking at the best way to reduce surface water entering the network. Can you update on this?
Yes, Bognor Main, so the one behind Butlins, is lucky enough to be one of those 2027 overflows that has to be fixed before 2027. So yeah, we've got a full program of works and several £1 million to spend in Bognor. I mean, I can't really do the whole program justice by talking about it in a couple of minutes. Essentially, most of the big Butlins, about 2 hectares, is connected right on top of the CSO. So we're working with Butlins to disconnect that area. There's improvements that can be made on site, and there's a lot of properties with their roofs connected in Bognor, but it's a very, very big urban area, and we're going to be looking to disconnect thousands, maybe even tens of thousands of properties to get Bognor where it needs to be.
Okay, have you got a few more minutes to answer some
Yeah,
more
yeah, sure.
questions? It is 8 o'clock, but there's a lot of questions. Steve says, I can see that high spillers are being targeted for investment, which is great. Can groups like this influence CSOs of concern due to their own concerns about impact to the environment?
Yeah, I mean, I'd advocate for anyone to kind of get in touch with us or the Environment Agency around that. I mean, I think DEFRA and the Environment Agency had a really, really difficult job in prioritizing it. They had to prioritize it somehow, and they chose to do it really, really objectively in terms of the sensitivity of the area that it went into, with things like shellfish, Ramsar, bathing water, triple SI, all of that. However, once I take the view that the priority should be on overall harm. And if people can quantify that particular harm, let's work together and let's try and get that to the front of the queue.
Yeah. Derek, I think this is more of a statement than a question. If every house had a really substantial water butt, 10 tons or more, then they would be able to water their gardens during hosepipe bans, but they would also reduce storm runoff. So yeah, definitely.
Again, anyone who wants to take steps to kind of slow down the flow and improve their water consumption is a friend of mine.
Yeah, I think there's multiple benefits
Okay.
to having water butts and rain gardens installed if you are able to do
I
that to your
think
house.
there's a secondary question from Derek. Says, would you subsidise this again if you're lucky or unlucky enough to be in one of these areas? All of this stuff we're doing at our own cost because I take the view that it's cheaper to get the water out than it is to deal with it once it's in our system.
Okay, another question from Veronica. Okay, a somewhat technical query. Okay, let's hope I can read this out with making some sense. Your swim the white data was quoted in CFU per 100 mil, yet that is Fluidian-based testing, and Fluidian technology does not give you CFUs, it gives you E. coli count per 100 mil. This is really significant as it makes it impossible to compare to designated swimming area levels, which are in CFUs. Okay, I hope that made some sense to you, Keith.
Yeah, it does. I mean, one of the shortcomings of bacteriological testing is it needs to be grown in a petri dish overnight to count the colonies. So real-time water quality monitoring of what's the colony unit like as I'm going in is an emerging technology. Now, these were kind of citizen scientists, volunteers, and we gave them a piece of kit that managed a proxy of E. coli, and it gave a result in about an hour rather than several days going over to the laboratory. So, with that comes some constraints, but gives us a better view of kind of water quality real time. And one of the things that we wanted to do as part of this project is, and something that gets asked so much is it safe to go in the water? Now, that's not something that we can answer because there's other sources of pollution other than CSOs, like dogs on the beach or birds or whatever, and also you can't get real-time bacteriological testing. It just doesn't exist at the moment. So part of it was to kind of invest in it, try it, see if it worked with some citizen scientists and feedback. So yeah, I take the point on that. But if you're going to go and test E. coli in the sea on that day, currently the best that technology can do is take a sample, send it to a lab, and then in 48 hours plus you got your result. And for people with their bucket and spade wanting to go in, that's just not good enough, not where we need to be.
Mm. Okay. So is treated water tested once it leaves the sewage works to ensure the system is working efficiently?
Yes, we have 24/7, 365 continuous water quality monitoring on all of our sewage works. So depending on the sewage works, you always get an ammonia monitor, you always get a turbidity monitor, and then in some of the more larger sewage works, we have kind of inline monitors for things like phosphorus and others as well. So there's always the continuous monitoring, and then there's also a sampling regime on that where samples are taken and go off to the lab to look at things that are more exotic or difficult to monitor in real time.
Okay, just a couple more. So thank you, Keith. Really get that it's a multifaceted problem, not connected to water companies alone, the runoff, agricultural and otherwise, together with what we put down our drains and in our loos. how far have the water companies gone to make people aware of issues? Also, do you think it makes it difficult for people to trust the changes needed when the CEOs of companies are enjoying huge bonuses?
I mean, just to tackle that last point, it kind of goes into the retention and attraction of staff. I've met a few water company CSOs, and they want it just as much as everyone else, and I just don't think they deserve some of the rap that they get in terms of making their lives difficult. The colleagues that I work with are some of the most environmentally focused and socially focused people that you could ever hope to meet. And I don't think it's necessarily fair, the criticism that they get for that. But I think the point about trust is really important, and water companies need to earn the trust of the communities, because as I've gone through, knocking on some doors, I get, oh yeah, you're that awful water company, it's your problem, why should I help you at all? When in actual fact, we do need to work with people to better manage the stormwater from their property.
Um, okay. Andrew asking, why is Bosham not included in the 55 2027 sites when it is supposed to be a Pathfinder site?
I'm pleased to confirm it is, and there's a significant program going on at Bosham. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of love for Bosham, and I think it's
There
only
is a lot of
spilled.
love for Bosham.
Yeah, yeah. It's only spilled a handful of times this year, so it's doing quite well. So, yeah, I feel like Glenn and I need to maybe do a session in Bosham to look at the performance of some of the stuff that we've done there. But it had an awful record of sometimes three-figure spills per year. I don't know his exact number for 2025, but it's very, very low. We have made a big impact there.
Okay. Um, and Veronica is again asking about the units for the E. coli testing. I don't know whether maybe it's useful if I put you in touch with Veronica, Keith, and
Yeah,
we
sure.
can continue that
Oh, thanks.
conversation.
I've been corrected by Andy as well, so thanks for that, Andy. Really appreciate that. 15, that's five too many.
All right. I think we are going to leave it there because you've been very kind in giving up part of your evening for us, Keith. Lots of questions. If people do have other questions that they don't feel have been answered, then do send them to me, and I can get in touch with Keith and other Southern Water colleagues and get them answered. And hopefully we can continue this conversation and continue having a healthy relationship with Southern Water in dealing with this issue. And thank you so much, Keith. It's been really helpful tonight, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.